We launched the Digital State project to explore a shift that is now unavoidable. Statehood is becoming a product experience, not only a physical jurisdiction. Across the world, the digital state is moving from theory to deployment across identity, governance, space, and virtual worlds. This report frames the stakes clearly as AI, the metaverse, and blockchain reshape identity, trust, and the machinery of governance. Sovereignty is no longer anchored only to geography. The core question we're asking is simple, but it changes everything. So, what it means to be a citizen, a state, or a society in the digital age, and what does sovereignty look like when it's tied to territory? You'll hear today from people at the frontier of this shift, spanning everything from digital identity and public sector AI, islands redefining sovereignty, to orbital infrastructure and the digital layer of reality. My aim to keep this session practical. So what's real now, what's coming next, and what governments must do to stay in control of outcomes while trying to move this at a digital speed. So to open the roundtable, we're honored to be joined by Jonathan Reid, Minister of Science for Barbados, someone shaping digital and scientific policy at a national level. Minister, thank you for being here today, and over to you.
It's an interesting time to be in the world. I have a 14-year-old daughter, and we do this thing in the morning on the car rides to school where we talk about whatever's in news agenda. And those rides keep me busy with every new activity that's happening in the world and this kind of figuring of all the negative things that are floating around. But I always have the task of flipping it around and showing all the possibilities, whether it's AI or whether it's the topic that we're talking about in terms of borderless states. I just think there's this abundance of opportunity and abundance of positivity that could be pulled out of it. So I'm excited by what this year is going to hold, and I'm excited by the future. I think small islands, which I was born in one, St. Lucia, and I now carry the portfolio of Minister of Innovation, Industry, Science and Technology for another small island in Barbados, have an incredible opportunity to hit this moment in time where they offer high-skilled, high-capacity human beings the opportunity to do incredible work as well as live incredible quality of lives at the same time. I think that's rare. I think there are many places where people could do extraordinary work, but they suffer through qualities of life that are not always optimized, right? Especially if you're at the right point in time of your life where you consider your family, you consider your personal safety, you consider a bunch of different things, the factors that play in place. There are the realities that some places where even though I do great work, the quality of life I might experience might not match up to. I think islands, in many ways, offer that balance. And part of Barbados' strategy, as it goes through a process of reindustrialization, a process of digital development, a process of population increase, we have set up a new policy, which is in front of Parliament right now, where we're going to go after significant pull-in of global talent to choose Barbados as a place where they want to live, work, and play from. A core component of that is very clear. We don't do citizenship by investment. We have a very specific program where through period of time spent in Barbados, it then triggers you to certain points for you to be able to then accelerate your residency as well as your citizenship. So if you live in Barbados for 90 days out of 365 days over 2 years, you'll be eligible for permanent residency. And then when you extend that off to 90 days out of 365 days, 3 years in a row, you then are going to become eligible to become a citizen once, of course, that passes through for Parliament later this year. So we have a very exciting program that we think is going to be incredibly offering. And we have some experience regarding it. During COVID, as many tourist-dependent countries had to face, you have to figure out inventive ways to continue having lots of people come to your shores. And we designed this program called the Welcome Stamp, where what we did was invite citizens all over the world. And once they qualified to come and live in Barbados, you kept your tax domicile wherever it is, but you were free to exist and live in Barbados for a year without any restrictions that coming in and out. And then we replenished that. And that was hugely successful. We had thousands of people, quite frankly, during those difficult days of shutdowns and all those kinds of things, choosing Barbados as a place where they brought their families, I met extraordinary people working for AWS, Google, you name it, right? Novo Nordisk, all types of people chose Barbados to get out of wherever they were, and just a place that was safe, that was sustainable, a place that understood and connected to their values, and they felt that they could keep their families safe during a difficult time. So we have some experience in that, and we want to expand that. The last part I will do without hogging too much of the conversation is really talk about part of my portfolio, which is really around digital development. So my goal is really, and I'll be frank, I didn't expect to have this role. I'm definitely more of a private sector guy that is pinch hitting as a minister of government, as a public servant. So my goal is to be really aggressive about the idea of digital development and digital advancement of the country in a very short period of time. So ramping up our sophistication around digital identification, ramping up our sophistication around digital trust and payments, unlocking tokenization as a way to obviously move in global currency, unlocking enhanced cryptography to make sure that people's identities and the assets are safe through things like CKP protocols, etc. Really ramping up our digital infrastructure with API frameworks and open data sets and data center infrastructure, network infrastructure. Both our major service providers just rolled out 5G last year. So really going very aggressive about the idea of being a digitally enhanced state, both from a strategic point of view, and there's obviously a lifestyle point of view as well, is the work that I really am going to be advancing this year. So to do that, to be frank, I need skills. I need people who share our values and just need high capacity skills. So Nirbhay and I speak a lot about the opportunities around the Caribbean. I'm happy to be part of this conversation and advance things in any way possible.
If we look to start the panel now with the big reframing. So, what happens when nations operate like service providers in a world of portable identity? So, on to Nirbhay. In your article, in your opening article, Nations as a Service, what do you mean by that idea in practical terms? So, what does that change for citizens, companies, and the state, really?
Essentially, philosophically, if you see historically, nation states were really defined by their physical territory, right? But now with public amenities becoming digitized, people being able to access all civic amenities online, um, sovereignty is now getting decoupled from geography, as you know. And the places where I spend majority of my time, Singapore and UAE, they really are on the forefront of this happening. In Singapore, you have 5 million users using SingPass, from which you can access over 5,000 public amenities, and they're doing over 10 million transactions on a monthly basis. Similarly, in UAE, you have the UAE Pass, which has productized how people access public services. And it's not necessarily a luxury, but it's a necessity. For example, in UAE, they've been able to save more than $4 billion by productizing how public services are accessed. They've been able to save more than $350 million in paper by replacing it through digital infrastructure. And more than that, they've been able to save 15 million human hours, which is an exponential increase in productivity. So what I mean to say by nations as service is that nations are going to start operating like platforms, and places like Estonia, Ukraine, and I think Alexander and Luukas will speak more about that. UAE and Singapore are on the forefront of this revolution. Now, what that does, so back in the day, we saw a level of prosperity being created at the back of industrial revolution, right? So now when nationhood becomes more digitized, the idea of citizenship also changes to a great measure. Citizenship becomes essentially a portfolio of affiliations, and we see that. For example, I'm a resident in Singapore. I have a UAE Golden Visa, and now UAE Golden Visa holders can access consular services. Historically, consular services were limited to people who held citizenships of a country, right? So as we walk into a digital nationhood, the idea of citizenship becomes more evolved. And particularly if you look at what's happening in the world with AI, there's going to be rise of location independent entrepreneurs. We have estimated more than 40 million digital nomads. We have almost 300 million immigrants, and these people have various affiliations around the world. So e-governance protocols become extremely relevant for these mobile people. But at the end of the day, what needs to be solved for is that the world needs a new operating system for corporate governance, particularly for location-independent entrepreneurs and employees. And these e-governance protocols are going to become extremely relevant as we walk into the next era. So the bottom line is countries are now starting to operate like platforms, not because it's a luxury, because it's a necessity. It leads to exponential increase in productivity. And the second piece is the idea of citizenship in the digital first world is evolving because the world is on the move. And that's what I cover in my article, Nations as a Service, Nicholas.
So if we're looking at Nearby framing sort of the why, I think Palau gives us the how. So if we move to William, who is CEO at Cryptic Labs, if we move from the idea of nations as a service to a live case study, a state-backed digital identity open to anyone, anywhere. So William, Palau is pioneering this state-backed digital ID open to anyone. What does Palau get right that larger nations are overlooking?
I think Palau is the second country offering digital residency after Estonia. We started the program back in 2021, and it has been a little bit of over 3 years, and there's about 50,000 digital residents signed up so far. So we offer them a digital residency ID, so like a physical ID, and then also digital ID on chain. So different than SIM-Pass or Dubai Pass, it is a decentralized identity. So the user get control of their own ID, and once it's minted, it's theirs. Initially, that was issued on Ethereum. We invited Vitalik to the island, and he minted the first one. And then we're also about to launch on Solana, so allowing kind of the ID to be minted on like different platforms and different chains. Just a little bit of background of the country. Palau is, it's about the same size of but the population is about 10%. So we have about like 20,000 people versus Barbados may have 300,000. And then Palau is of course like near Philippines in Asia.
And do you see these digital IDs changing cross-border economic activity, say over the next decade?
Yeah, because then, like instead of doing like a few rounds of KYC, right? Like once the user possess their DID in their wallet, it's
Hmm.
pre-checked, it's pre-KYC'd, and it has like generalized claims. So like instead of like, verifying you're born in 1993, May 22nd, it has generalized claims as over 21 Chu or over 18 Chu. So versus exposing your actual birthday, like you can verify with claims.
If we take a look at what happens when, see, reinvention isn't optional. So some of the most radical thinking about digital sovereignty isn't coming from places, well, it's really coming from places facing existential pressure. So where continuity itself is really at stake. So, James, you've said that constraints drive innovation, that islands innovate because they must. So, when Tuvalu turns to digital nationhood as a response to rising seas, you argue it isn't just adaptation, but a way to preserve sovereignty, culture, and identity when territory is threatened. So, how do you see this reframing what sovereignty looks like for other climate vulnerable nations?
Island Innovation, really, we're a platform that tries to bring together remote and island regions from all over the world to share ideas like this on sustainable economic development. And you're absolutely right that these ideas around sovereignty and around kind of the digital ideas of the state are being trialed, tested, and deployed in many island nations, as we heard from the Honourable Minister from Barbados, is one of several countries that are really ahead of the pack in this. Tuvalu is one of them. And this also comes at a time when the entire existence of the country is threatened. So William mentioned Palau is 20,000 people, Tuvalu is 12,000. the population of the nation. The highest point above sea level is 1.5 meters. And it's been the canary in the coal mine, for want of a better word, the country that's been held up as a symbol of climate change. Tuvalu recently edited its constitution to actually put a clause in to assert that notwithstanding any loss of physical territory, it would continue its sovereignty. Because right now, this is completely untested in international law. If a country like Tuvalu physically disappears, what happens to its sovereignty? And so, not only are these digital questions that we're talking about, there are these legal questions around sovereignty, which some low-lying small island states are facing. Looking at ocean elements as well, because when you think about a small island state like Tuvalu or indeed Barbados, the land footprint is actually a small percentage of its total sovereign area. A huge, maybe 99% in some cases, of its sovereign area is actually oceans. So there's multiple elements around sovereignty that come into question, but one of the big ones is under the Montevideo Convention, when sovereignty was defined, it was this idea of land area. So, what will that happen? At the same time, Tuvalu is trying to preserve many of its traditions, its cultures, the ideas of its state in the cloud. Obviously, that is a worst case scenario that's being done as something if the inevitable worst case thing happens. No one wants that to happen, of course. But if something due to climate change does happen on the island, there would be some kind of future record and also some kind of safeguard for descendants of the islanders in the future. So it's a really interesting link for the societal, economic aspects to these conversations, I think.
Do you think that these digital platforms can actually replace physical homelands, or is it just more of a way to say protection for these cultures and these societies as well?
I mean, as I said, it's a worst case scenario outcome.
Yeah.
Nothing can replace someone's homeland, and there's not really a full plan in place. I mean, where do people from a small island nation go? But there is a history of also digital technologies being trialed in these areas. So Tuvalu's domain name is .tv. They made a lot of money in the 90s. The new country that is making a lot of money is Anguilla.ai. So there are, it's a small thing, but if you have a population of 10, 20,000 people, actually that's a huge income. And in Tuvalu's case, as in Anguilla's case, both those domain names were used to create sovereign wealth funds that would help for the development of the country. So there is an interesting way that some of these conversations around other aspects of sovereignty. I mean, in a way, a domain name is just one small form of sovereignty that is being deployed, can also be used to protect the future. And ultimately, if organizations are engaging with some of these states, that's what politicians are thinking about when they're looking to engage in these technologies. They're thinking, how do we safeguard the culture and the well-being of our population given these risks, climate, economic, that we're looking at?
We've just talked about, say, sovereignty under environmental pressure. If we move to Ukraine now, that shows another dimension, really. We're looking at sovereignty under active threat. So this is where digital statehood stops being sort of experimental and becomes operational, delivered at scale, sort of under these extreme conditions. Alexander, Ukraine built a national digital ecosystem under extraordinary pressure. What factors allowed DIA, I believe that's the ecosystem with digital public services you guys have created, to scale so fast?
We have to keep in mind that this transformation started in 2019, actually in the end of 2019, so basically in 2020. And well, I guess back in the days there was also a pressure, but different kind. So it all started, we had these elections with President Zelensky just came into power, and we had this long history of corruption, and we like 40 million people country, big territory. It's hard to keep track on, and on many things. So there's a lot of corruption, and it started from, I think, political will and this desire to change things over and do not repeat the same mistakes that other people did before. And he said basically that we cannot just change people. We need to make something radical to like use technology instead of just moving people over. And this was their backbone of those changes. And he said we need to build country in smartphones, basically like digitize the country. And we started from digital identity. Driver license was the first document, but then there was the first. I think we introduced first in the world who introduced digital passports that were valid in the country, so we can travel, we can identify itself. Then it moved to many other things, um, uh, ending up with their marriage online and gun permits, issuing construction permits online. There's so many, like hundreds of different services, and now 23 million active users, and I think we have like millions, more than 15 million requests every day. So that they pull the data back and forth. But getting back to your question, how it happened in Ukraine, it's only because the president said, "I want to do this," and then there was a creation of Minister of Digital Transformation. So we're created in just 6 years ago, and minister was also vice prime minister. It allowed him to coordinate other ministries, and we have created an institution called CDTO, Chief Digital Transformation Officers. So in every minister, in every major government authority, we put a person in charge of digital transformation, and he has had to be at least a deputy head. So he like vice president of enterprise or deputy head or deputy minister. So he has to have the power to make those changes. And in 2 years, it became inevitable. So there was a lot of resistance in the beginning. There was a lot of constraints, a lot of pushbacks, but eventually this allowed us to I don't know, like put a virus in everybody, basically that, and everything starts to digitize. Like every institution now compete how we can digitize more. And now with even with the AI, it goes by the similar process. So of course, we are we are trailblazing, but other institutions are also like, okay, what we can do in terms of AI, how we can be one step forward. So that's actually gave us solid results, which are we moved in global ratings from 102nd place to 5th place in the world in terms of digital services and public services. Many things are digitized in Ukraine, and now with the AI, we want to transform this vision from digital state to agentic state. So we want now go even further to substitute digital services with AI agents and super agents that control other agents to give people those services. So summarizing what I said is in Ukraine, it worked because of strong political will from top to bottom.
Thank you very much, Alexander. And I see you mentioned that you're now sitting at fifth in the world when it comes to public sector AI, and the goal is to reach third place by 2030. Is that do you see, what kind of hurdles do you see on the way to getting there? And or do you think that's, you're on your way there and that's where you're going to be compared to sort of other nations and how they're acting with their sort of digital infrastructure?
This is exactly, Nicholas. This is related to the challenges that we're facing currently because of the war, because we have so many people living in the country. We have lack of manpower, and we started to think what we can do, and also security, many security issues. Like people cannot physically go somewhere to get services. Obvious, sometimes it's just of physical threat to your life. And the lack I would call them bureaucrats, right? So we cannot move as forward as was before the war. Actually pushes us towards AI because with AI we can easily scale, or we can very quickly introduce new services. And this we actually tested a couple of concepts already. We have proof of concept and actually working services based on AI. And when we built this, we realized that this could be multiplied, and this could solve our current problems and issues much more efficient, rather than, I don't know, doing like we did before, like hiring a lot of developers, making those digital services one by one. And I guess that's for Ukraine. That's one of the ways to survive, to go forward, because otherwise, I don't know, like we just cannot do major progress anyway. Because like with if we with the even with we still, I don't know, maybe have 35 million people. It's a lot. And they want to get a service. And imagine if all those people going for online services, and you have to put so many support people. We don't have so many. So we substitute support with AI. And that's like example of why we so eager to move forward with AI.
So we've focused on statehood and identity so far. A next question could be a little bit more radical. So what happens when when the environment those states govern becomes sort of programmable too? So when the physical world gains this digital layer. Hrish, I know you've created or creating this programmable digital twins of physical spaces and places. How do you think governments should leverage the metaverse?
As we're moving into leveraging, greater technology and in creating these digital systems, as Alexander mentioned, as they're moving into AI agents, and technology continues to evolve, the world is getting smaller in many ways. We're more interconnected. Many of us are traveling, migrating to different locations. I'm a digital nomad now for 15 years. I've lived in Ukraine. I've lived, all over the world. I have a Palau citizenship as well. Many of us are thinking about very global kind of paradigms for governance, for digital interactions, and even for physical ownership and physical locations. And at SuperWorld, what we're doing is we're enabling network states, digital states, to be able to have a home and to enable anyone, whether it's a community that is looking to create a digital and a physical presence, or already has a physical presence and wants to go more digital, or a nation state that wants to do this as well, take advantage of these technologies, whether it's immersive tech, Web3, AI, to be able to do that right out of the box, to be able to, again, what we call build a world, which is a map. We all use maps. We're all on a map. And those maps, again, in Superworld are world maps. And so they might, if a nation state wants to, enable other people from around the world, for example, to get a golden visa in Dubai, where they can do that digitally, natively in other places in the world as well. Put that content digitally in places where people can interact digitally or physically. And so when we think of digital content, and digital programs and digitization of society, we often don't think of location. The internet is global. But in fact, a lot of these things happen very locally, as governments that are doing digital programs understand. These programs kind of operate within a regional location, and maybe in a city or a state or a country, etc. And at Superworld, we're really enabling those countries to expand globally and to enable anyone to do that. And I think when we're seeing that these programs are working is when people are accessing them, and we see that in Ukraine, we see that in Palau, we see that in Singapore, we see that in Dubai, as was brought up. People are economically benefiting. There's governance there that allows people to digitally and physically interact and have ownership, whether that's digital or physical. We've opened up a new paradigm of digital ownership of locations. So if you can't, physically own land, can you digitally be able to be involved in places? So there's a lot to it, but I would say that what we're building is a way for users to utilize this technology, Web3, AI, and immersive technology to enhance their real life, as well as collectively, all of us, all of our, nation states, network states, digital states, sovereign individuals, global nomads, all of us to be able to use this technology to empower ourselves and enhance humanity. That's the goal.
You mentioned obviously these decentralized digital societies like network states. What do you think will be the first real sign that a network state becomes, say, politically or economically meaningful?
So, again, I think it's really the net results of how from the ground up citizens or members of that network state are interacting with that infrastructure. So are they able to, earn income? Are they able to do administrative tasks digitally or physically in a real world location? Are they able to expand those services globally in ways that they're utilizing the technology? So I think it's really a matter of what the engagement is with these technologies. Obviously, Alexander mentioned the advances that they've made in Ukraine through implementing these types of technologies in Palau as well, and in Singapore and Dubai. And we have these examples there, right? And I think when you see the results of that engagement, that's when you know it's working. And the beauty is it is working. And the panel here has kind of demonstrated that. We've seen it at SuperWorld, right? People are buying locations in around the world. They're creating content. They're engaging. They're very into it. And I think that's what's going to be important, because when you're building a decentralized network state or society, we all build it collectively together. It's in the pudding of the people kind of coming together and make that a reality, and we see that happening already. So that's very exciting.
Your article was on the agentic state, which could possibly be one of the most difficult frontiers. This world where services, policies, and decisions are mediated by AI agents. So, you framed that the agentic state is one there where obviously AI agents interact with citizens and businesses on their behalf. So, how do you design an AI-driven state that consistently chooses the right outcomes rather than just, say, optimizing workflows?
I mean, this whole discussion has been fascinating because we've basically been talking about how the technology of the internet and the digital era is leading to some real disaggregation and business model changes for how states work. But at the same time, we have an entirely new technological revolution, at least as profound as what's happened in the last generation, with what AI is doing right now. And so the agentic state, which is a term that we coined last year, is initially a vision paper that sort of lays out, if we take the capabilities that AI agents now are starting to offer and think through what could this mean for how governments function, what might that look like? The paper itself, which I do encourage everyone to read, it's pretty dense, but we really try and systematize that. And we already have a lot of the governments who are involved in this paper starting to use that framework as they're developing their use of agents in government. And what's so exciting for me about AI agents is precisely what you mentioned, which is there's sort of the incremental thing of, okay, like it's the next round of tech, we can make everything a little better. But unlike what we've done with deterministic automation, agents can pursue goals and can embody different mandates and different tasks. And so we start getting at the kind of the agency function of the state, which is more than just being a platform, right? I mean, the countries that we're citizens of if they're well-governed countries, and if they're ones that deliver public goods, we look to them also to, provide rule of law, to provide education, to provide healthcare, and to combat ills like corruption, like social violence, and so on and so forth. And we're now in a situation, where the bottleneck that we've always had, which is, well, do we have enough smart people working in our society and government, is not necessarily a bottleneck anymore. That we can actually take these mandates that used to be carried out by people in various public functions and perhaps give them partially to the agents. And so I think the optimistic story there is that we get a whole lot more positive capability to provide all sorts of public goods. Now, to get to your question of how do we actually do it, I'm going to be very transparent. We don't know yet. I mean, the idea of agents, is a couple of years old. Okay, there's like a prehistory, but sort of in the current incarnation, the actual broad, deployment in any sector is at most 12 months old. And so I think we're going to go into this period of real experimentation on what AI looks like in every sector, but also in government. And we're going to figure that out. Because I mean, if we go into the technology, there are going to be 100 wrong paths that we pursue on figuring this out. But I think the belief here is in the same way that I can go to an agent today and say, look, help me figure out a better diet plan, or help me be a better version of myself, or help me build my business, that we can also go to the agent and say, hey, help me root out corruption in government, help me make sure that, no child in a socially disadvantaged situation doesn't take advantage of the resources that we already with our taxpayer funds provide. So I think there's a positive story, and we won't get into all the dystopias that are there too. But the best way to deal with all the dystopias is actually to have the good guys and the people who are trying to build well-functioning governments and societies know how to use these tools, put them to work, and hopefully the good outweighs the bad over time.
I know that you've spent a lot of time in government, many years, and with your sort of experience, what do you think would be the hardest sort of challenge for the public sector to embrace these AI agents? So, for example, actually relinquishing full control to, say, AI.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's going to vary by country because different countries have different procedural backgrounds. I think for many, many countries, the shift from deterministic to probabilistic thinking is really, really tough because the way that most countries' administrative laws and social safety nets and so on are set up, they're rule-based systems. And now we're basically coming saying, actually, let's have the ability to make much more fine-grained decisions, maybe even more nuanced than people have ever made. That's really tough. So that's a conceptual challenge. There's also just like the same challenge that governments have had in tech for the last generation, which is just because of how bureaucracy functions, because of how iteration and all these sort of things that you have to do quickly to build a tech company are very hard to do in the public sector, the full stack from the rules to the people to the funding. Those are all going to slow down the adoption in the way that they've slowed down, things like going to cloud or building interoperability systems or deploying EID. So I think in some sense it's going to be the same grind that we've been working on for a long time, which of course also means the opportunity space for the countries that are better and faster at this for whatever reason, because they're in a moment of crisis, because they have a different, culture within their administration is huge. And of course, the two kind of the bits to put together is like, okay, now we can take the network states we've been talking about, the fact that we have a whole population of people who are more nomadic, who are sort of looking to disaggregate the stack, and combine that with the fact that actually there are going to be layers of the stack where the difference in capability and the quality of the services provided by the platform, if you will, is going to grow massively. We're already used to the idea that there's a difference in quality of governance between rich countries and emerging countries and so on, but there are going to be a whole bunch of new dimensions of differences of capability, quality of platform. So there are definitely some opportunities for really capable countries. And obviously, the flip side to that, which I don't think we've talked about, and is a sort of the soft the dark underbelly to this whole discussion, is who's getting hollowed out, who's getting disaggregated, and that of course is also part of the story, which is there are countries that are not keeping up with all of these changes, and if they don't get their act together, they face a real bleed of their citizens, of their business models.
So we've, all these conversations we've had so far, we've really looking at sort of now the infrastructure layer that kind of underpins everything we've discussed, and that is, and in your world, space. So if we look at why orbital systems are now, say, core to digital sovereignty, you frame orbital systems as this core digital infrastructure. What's the strongest case for why space now belongs in every nation's digital strategy?
Well, I think, I've been now working in the industry for almost a decade. And what I've really come to understand is that the space domain is so critical and often quietly underwriting our everyday digital life, right? So satellite connectivity is like the only layer that routes around physical infrastructure and borders. Like there is no broadband internet or secure blockchain without space assets. And really, space systems factor borders, disasters, and terrain very different to terrestrial networks, which is why we're seeing a exponential growth in the defense sector, finance, emergency networks, all using space and the space environment and different orbits in the space environment to support critical infrastructure. So really, from my viewpoint, and I'm sure many others in the space industry, there is no digital state without digital infrastructure, and there's no digital infrastructure without space. So if we accept that modern states are now run on data, which I think we can all agree on this panel, then we can't treat space as a sort of nice to have or the next frontier. It's the current frontier. And it's so foundational to the infrastructure, and it underpins everything that we're all doing here. Everyone here's respective industries. So again, really, nearly every function of a digital state depends on space-enabled systems. So timing for financial markets is a good example, positioning for logistics and mobility, getting your Uber, booking your air flight, moving around, Earth observation to monitor climate change, monitoring energy, infrastructure, security. It's all using space assets. And what's changed over the last few years is it's not because it's become important, it's because we're so dependent on it. And we're so dependent on these assets in space. And a big reason for that and what's underpinning it is launch infrastructure. So the ability to go into space. A decade ago it was not possible. It was only national space agencies and a handful of smaller actors. But now we look at the world today and there's almost 100 national space agencies all over the world relying on the space environment. Launch costs have moved from, say, $3,000 per kilogram to get into low Earth orbit 5 years ago. We're now looking at $1,000 a kilogram today. And when the Starship comes online and is fully reusable, we'd be looking at $100 per kilogram. So think about how that then moves, customers and different products into the space environment. All of us can start to think to have our own satellites or various kinds of space assets in space. And I think lastly, Nicholas, I would just say that, when developing a nation state, one really needs to consider developing a space strategy around that. And that space strategy should really be global in nature. So it should obviously apply to the nation, but it should really have a global outlook when putting this together.
Thank you, Anna. And from your article as well, you've imagined this digital state visa for space. With that, what sort of, say, concepts do you believe out of that could be, say, implemented in this decade? And who needs to lead that? Is that states? Is it space agencies or even the private sector?
So a really good analogy is, and something I've been working on personally for the last, say, 5 to 6 years, is space stations. So we're now seeing a growth of private and commercial operators looking at having purpose-built space stations or free flyer modules in space. So a decade ago, this was, again, never possible, but it is today. So if you can start to imagine a world where you have these free flyer modules, purpose-built space stations, and you start to look at them like mixed-use business parks in space, or certain types of manufacturing or industry creation in space, you can start to see a world where these have their own free zones or they operate in a free zone. And therefore, the same principles apply as they do here terrestrially. When you start to think about different free zones in the UAE, where am I going to set up my company? What does that look like? Who am I selling to? Who am I providing to? Again, the same rules of that marketplace apply or could apply in the space environment. And so kind of harping on to what Hrish was saying, which I found really interesting, is that you can have this blend of both digital and physical in the space environment. So before we get there, before we can have, multiple purpose-built space modules or space stations, which you and I can own or be part of or own a fraction of, you can start to think of a world where we create digital twins around these space assets. And people like you and I can start interacting with those environments. We can use immersive technologies. We can enter that world before even going there. But again, back to the point, there's no space environment without launch and the infrastructure and the road to space. And, thanks to companies like SpaceX, Blue Origin, Relativity, and Rocket Lab, and many, many others, we can have private astronauts like you and I flying there to your module or mine, or to an extension of Dubai in space, or an extension of Barbados, or any of the islands that are going underwater. They too can have their own real estate in space. And it really becomes this next level or frontier of statehood.
Well, amazing, and really futuristic sci-fi stuff. It sounds like, if this is, even a couple of years ago, just to discuss these sort of topics now. So, I just want to say thank you very much. Thank you, everyone. We've spoken to everyone now. All our contributors. I just wanted to not to put anyone on the spot. I don't think we've got a few minutes left. If I was to open up a sort of a shared question to everyone, what would you say is the biggest misconception about digital statehood right now, in sort of your experience or in your sort of line of work?
Maybe that all the people are really ready to embrace it.
Yeah.
Because they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's like more like political level, we're moving forward. But then when we drop down to people on the ground, and they name different problems, and sometimes it's not just on the top priority list.
In our case, a lot of people think, as an example with SuperWorld, this is a totally virtual thing. You're sitting in a room with a headset on. That's not what we're doing. We're something that's all about the real world, real places, going, traveling, and getting to know the real environment that we're in now. And so when people realize that unlocks a whole new world for them, because they realize that they can be where they are. They don't have to necessarily be deep into all of these technologies, but they can access it in ways like a map. Like everyone uses a map, Google Maps, and that's the same thing we're doing.
I think seeing the threat to traditional governance structures and not seeing the opportunities. I think that in the government side, there's a big understanding of threats, but there's many government or people on the political side who are not engaging with these opportunities. So it was great that you had people on this panel from that political side who are seeing the opportunities coming out of this for governments.
I just point out how sticky the legacy players are. I mean, Estonia launched e-residence in 2012. It's 14 years later. It's cool. It does some nice stuff. It's got, 130,000 people on it. But if you compare that to any other product or platform and how we expect those to scale, it's just a tiny, tiny, tiny drop in the ocean. So either this is all going to remain a niche, or we're still at the very early sort of run up to maybe an exponential takeoff or a hockey puck at some point.
Thank you so much to everyone, and we've landed it on perfect timing here as well. So thank you everyone for keeping your answers to the point there as well. So thank you. So as I say, I'll finish off now. I'll just close up and say, a big thank you to all our speakers here and to everyone that's been watching today. Thank you all for joining. If there's one sort of takeaway from this digital state project, is that the digital state is really already unfolding across sectors and borders, not as a single perfect model, but as a set of capabilities. So as we've talked about, trusted identity, adapted services, resilient sovereignty, and infrastructure that now extends to orbit.